My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter while I stood there frozen, watching the family group chat explode with messages. A voice recording played on loop in my mind, my own voice shouting words I recognized but didn't remember saying together. "You're manipulating everything," and "I don't care about your feelings," and "this marriage was a mistake," all spliced into one terrible confession that never actually happened. My mother's text appeared at the top of the screen. "I can't believe this, Danny. How could you say these things to her?" My hands shook as I scrolled through dozens of similar messages from relatives, friends, co-workers. Everyone had heard it. Everyone believed it. But I never said those words in that order. The audio was real, yes, my voice, my tone, but arranged like puzzle pieces into something ugly and untrue. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinet, heart hammering so hard I thought my chest might crack open. My name is Daniel, and this is how the woman I trusted with my heart tried to poison every word that ever left my mouth. The messages kept coming. My sister wrote that she was disappointed in me. My boss from the accounting firm sent a formal text saying HR needed to speak with me Monday morning. Friends from church asked if I was okay, their concern wrapped in judgment I could feel through the screen. I tried calling Tessa, my wife of 8 years, but the call went straight to a message saying I'd been blocked. Panic clawed at my throat. I called again from a different number. She answered on the third ring, her voice calm and distant. "Stop calling me, Daniel. You've done enough damage." Before I could respond, she hung up. I tried reaching our daughter Ava, who was staying at Tessa's mother's house for the weekend. No answer. The betrayal landed like a punch to the gut. This wasn't spontaneous anger or a fight that got out of hand. This was planned. Tessa had engineered this moment, recorded me over months, cut my words into weapons, and released them into the world like poison. She'd planned this. I needed to understand how this started, so I forced myself to think back. A year ago, Tessa had insisted we needed help with our communication. She said I didn't listen, that I interrupted her, that our arguments went in circles. I'd agreed we could do better. She found a therapist who specialized in couples work and suggested we record our disagreements at home to review later. "That way we can see our patterns," she'd explained over coffee one morning. "We can play them back and understand what went wrong." It seemed reasonable at the time. Healthy, even. I wanted our marriage to work. I wanted Ava to grow up in a stable home. So I said yes. Tessa promised she'd delete the recordings after we discussed them in therapy. It was just a tool, she said. A way to hold ourselves accountable. I trusted her completely. That small decision, that single yes, would eventually cost me everything. But back then, sitting at our kitchen table with morning light streaming through the windows, I had no idea what she was building. During the early months of recording, everything seemed normal. We'd argue about typical things. Money, schedules, who forgot to pick up groceries. Tessa would set her phone on the counter, hit record, and we'd talk through whatever was bothering us. Afterward, she'd play it back and point out moments where I'd raised my voice or cut her off. She called it accountability. I called it uncomfortable but necessary. Then came the quarantine. Suddenly we were home together all day, every day. The arguments increased. Small things became big things. I'd leave dishes in the sink, and she'd record a 10-minute lecture about respect. I'd forget to respond to a text, and she'd record her disappointment. Every disagreement became a test of empathy. She started replaying old arguments to analyze tone. I noticed she'd listened to them multiple times, taking notes. When I asked why, she said she was working on understanding our dynamic. I believed her. One Saturday afternoon, Tessa invited her sister Mia over for coffee. I was upstairs working on some spreadsheets when I heard voices drifting up from the kitchen. Curious, I moved to the top of the stairs to listen. That's when I heard my own voice playing from Tessa's phone, but the words sounded wrong. Harsh. I heard myself say, "I don't care what you think," followed immediately by, "You're too sensitive about everything," and then, "Maybe you should just leave." But I knew those sentences came from 3 different arguments, weeks apart. Tessa had cut them together to make me sound cruel. Mia gasped. He really said that to you? Tessa's voice was quiet, wounded. All the time. My stomach dropped. I walked downstairs slowly, trying to stay calm. That's not how that conversation went, I said from the doorway. Both women turned to look at me. Tessa's expression didn't change. You know what you said, Daniel. I have proof. She smiled slightly and poured more coffee. After that day, I noticed a shift in how people treated me. At family dinners, Tessa's parents would give me tight smiles and change the subject when I entered the room. Friends from our couples group started sitting farther away, their conversations stopping when I approached. During a barbecue at my brother's house, I overheard Tessa speaking quietly to his wife about walking on eggshells at home. She mentioned the recordings, how they helped her see patterns of manipulation I didn't even realize I was doing. I stood behind the fence, listening, feeling like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. She was building something. A narrative. A case against me constructed from fragments of truth, twisted into lies. I started noticing how carefully she worded things around others, how she'd sigh dramatically when I spoke, how she'd touch her forehead like I'd given her a headache. Every gesture was a performance, and I was the villain in her script. I didn't know how to fight something so invisible. One night, our daughter Ava woke up crying from a nightmare. I went to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and rubbed her back until her breathing steadied. It's okay, sweetheart, I whispered. Daddy's here. You're safe. I told her a story about a brave girl who wasn't afraid of the dark because she knew her family loved her. Ava smiled, her eyes already closing. I kissed her forehead and stood to leave. That's when I noticed Tessa standing in the doorway, her phone held up, recording. What are you doing? I asked, keeping my voice low so Ava wouldn't wake. Tessa lowered the phone slowly. Just capturing memories. I stepped into the hallway and closed Ava's door behind me. Delete it. Delete all of them. This has gone too far. Tessa stared at me, her expression cold and calm. If you were honest, Daniel, you wouldn't be afraid of proof. She turned and walked back to our bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the dark hallway. Our next therapy session felt different. I arrived hoping to finally address the recording issue, but the moment I sat down, the therapist, a woman named Dr. Carson, looked at me with something close to pity. Daniel, I want to talk about emotional regulation, she began. I glanced at Tessa, who sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Dr. Carson continued, Tessa has shared some recordings with me that show a pattern of escalation in your tone. I think we need to work on how you express frustration. My chest tightened. She shared recordings with you? Without telling me. Dr. Carson nodded. It's part of building trust. Transparency. But it wasn't transparent. It was selective. Tessa had curated which recordings to share, which moments made me look worse. I tried to explain that the audio was edited, that full context mattered, but Dr. Carson cut me off gently. Denial is a common defense mechanism, Daniel. I felt outnumbered, unheard, erased. Tessa sat there silent, letting the therapist fight her battle. When the session ended, I walked to my car alone, feeling like I was disappearing. I started sleeping in the guest room. Tessa didn't object. She told Ava that Daddy needed space because he got angry when he was sad. Our daughter looked at me differently after that, cautious, like I might break at any moment. I wanted to explain, to tell her the truth, but how do you explain manipulation to a 7-year-old? How do you tell your child that her mother is weaponizing love? So I said nothing. I just hugged Ava tighter when she'd let me and tried to be present during the shrinking moments we had together. At night, alone in the guest room, I started writing everything down in a notebook. Dates, conversations, what really happened versus what Tessa claimed happened. I needed something solid, something real to hold on to when the gaslighting made me question my own memories. The notebook became my anchor. Proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Proof that the truth still existed somewhere, even if no one else could see it yet. I hid it under the mattress. One evening, my phone buzzed with a notification. Tessa had sent me a file. No message, just a folder labeled Communication Patterns. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were dozens of voice memos, each labeled with a date. I clicked on one from 3 weeks ago. It was our argument about Ava's bedtime. But in this version, everything I said sounded harsh, dismissive, and cruel. Tessa had cut out her own provocations, her own escalations, leaving only my responses floating in a vacuum. I sounded like a monster. I opened another file. Same thing. And another. All of them expertly edited to erase context and amplify my worst moments. My knees buckled. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, understanding finally what she'd been building. Not just a narrative. A digital weapon. Proof that could destroy me in any courtroom, any workplace, any relationship. She'd been collecting ammunition for months, and I'd handed her the bullets willingly. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway and cried for the first time in years. Tessa's mother called a family meeting at their house the following Sunday. I arrived to find Tessa, her parents, and Mia sitting in the living room, faces grave. Tessa's father gestured for me to sit. "We need to talk about your behavior, Daniel." Before I could respond, Tessa played one of the recordings. My voice filled the room, angry and cutting. But I remembered that argument. Tessa had accused me of forgetting our anniversary, which I hadn't. I'd planned a surprise dinner. When I tried to explain, she kept interrupting, kept pushing until I snapped. The recording started right at my breaking point, making me look unhinged. "This is what I live with," Tessa said quietly, wiping non-existent tears. Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain the missing context, but every word I spoke was twisted into evidence of gaslighting. "You're doing it right now," Mia said. "Making yourself the victim." I stood to leave. Nobody stopped me. That night, sitting alone in my car outside a gas station, I realized I'd lost. Not because I was guilty, but because the truth didn't matter anymore. Monday morning, I received an email from my boss asking me to come to his office immediately. When I arrived, the HR director was already there, her expression professional but cold. "Daniel, we've received a complaint about workplace behavior," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside was a printed screenshot of the voice recording that had gone viral in the family chat. An anonymous complaint claimed I'd created a hostile environment, that coworkers felt uncomfortable around me. I knew immediately who'd filed it. "This isn't what it seems," I started, but the HR director held up her hand. "We're placing you on paid leave pending investigation. We take these matters seriously." My boss wouldn't meet my eyes. I left the building carrying a cardboard box with my desk belongings, feeling like a criminal. That evening, the church sent an email asking me to take a break from volunteering with the youth group. The message was polite but firm. I'd become a liability. I packed a suitcase that night while Tessa watched from the bedroom doorway. "Where will you go?" she asked. Her tone wasn't concerned, just curious. "Does it matter?" I zipped the suitcase and lifted it off the bed. Ava appeared behind Tessa, her small face confused. "Daddy, are you leaving?" I knelt down and hugged her tight. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. But I love you so much." When I stood, Tessa was hugging Ava to her side, protective and performative. "Maybe now you'll listen," she said softly. I walked out the front door, put my suitcase in the trunk, and drove to a motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like old carpet and disinfectant. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall, trying to figure out how my life had collapsed so completely. Then I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Every detail. Every manipulation. Every lie. If the truth didn't matter to them, I'd make it matter to someone. I didn't know who yet. But I'd find them. At the motel, I created a system. I documented everything in spreadsheets. Dates, times, what Tessa claimed versus what actually happened. I pulled up old text messages and screenshotted conversations where she contradicted herself. I found therapy receipts showing which sessions we discussed what topics. Slowly, methodically, I rebuilt the truth from fragments she thought I'd forgotten. I started noticing patterns. How she'd provoke me in subtle ways, then start recording only when I responded. How she'd ask loaded questions designed to make me sound defensive. How she'd tell Ava I was stressed right before I'd try to spend time with her, priming our daughter to see me as unstable. It was brilliant, really. Evil, but brilliant. Tessa had turned communication itself into a trap. Every word I spoke could be harvested, edited, weaponized. I realized I'd been living in a surveillance state disguised as marriage. The notebook filled up. Then a second one. I kept writing. I reached out to Leo, an old friend from college who'd become a sound engineer. We'd lost touch over the years, but I remembered he worked with audio forensics for a law firm. I called him late one night from the motel parking lot. Leo, I need help. Something strange is happening with recordings of my voice. We met at a coffee shop the next morning. I played him several of Tessa's edited files on my laptop. Leo leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Then he pulled out his own laptop and loaded the files into professional software. Within minutes, he pointed at the screen. See these waveforms? These cuts? This audio has been heavily edited, spliced together from multiple sources. He zoomed in on one section. This sentence alone has 3 separate cuts. Nobody talks like this naturally. My chest loosened for the first time in weeks. Can you prove it? Leo nodded. Absolutely. I can create a forensic report showing every edit point. This is fabricated, Daniel. It's not just biased, it's fake. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like hope. Leo worked for 3 days straight, analyzing every recording Tessa had sent me. He created a detailed forensic report with visual graphs showing exactly where audio had been cut, moved, and spliced together. Some files had over 20 edit points in a single minute of playback. It was undeniable proof of manipulation. When he handed me the final report, printed and bound, I felt tears well up. Thank you, I said, my voice breaking. Leo gripped my shoulder. This is serious, man. What she did, it's not just unethical. It could be illegal depending on how she uses it. I didn't confront Tessa immediately. Instead, I made copies of everything. One set went to a safe deposit box. One went to my lawyer. One stayed with Leo. And one I kept in my motel room, reviewing it every night, reminding myself that I wasn't crazy. The truth existed. It was documented, measured, proven. Now I just needed the right moment to reveal it. I decided to wait. Let Tessa keep digging. Let her confidence grow. Eventually, she'd make a mistake. 2 weeks later, Tessa texted asking if I wanted to meet for dinner to talk. I miss you, she wrote. Maybe we can start over. I agreed, curious what game she was playing now. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown. She wore a dress I'd always liked, her hair done carefully. Over appetizers, she talked about therapy, about growth, about how she wanted our family back together. But mid-meal, she started slipping in small comments. If you could just control your temper. When you get angry, it scares Ava. Each jab was subtle, designed to sound like concern. And then I noticed it. Her phone on the table, screen dark but positioned toward me. She was still recording. Testing me, hoping I'd react so she could add more ammunition to her collection. But this time, I was ready. I smiled and kept my voice calm and pleasant. Because in my pocket, my own phone was recording too. Every word, every manipulation, every lie wrapped in false concern. When dinner ended, I hugged her goodbye and drove back to the motel, victorious in a way she'd never see coming. That night, I sent the recording to Leo. He worked quickly, pulling out key moments where Tessa could be heard whispering to herself between responses to me. She was feeding herself lines, rehearsing attacks, strategizing in real time. Leo synced her whispers with the old, edited recordings she'd sent me months ago. The match was perfect. Phrases she'd whispered at dinner appeared in those old files, proving she'd been scripting my downfall all along. "This is incredible," Leo said over the phone. "You've caught her in the act of constructing false evidence." I leaned back against the motel headboard, feeling something shift inside me. Not anger anymore. Something colder. Clarity. Tessa had built her weapon carefully, methodically. But she'd never considered that I might learn her techniques, that I might start documenting too. Now I had proof not just of her editing, but of her intent. The question was what to do with it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted my life back. I wanted Ava to know her father wasn't a monster. Over the next week, Tessa's behavior changed. She grew paranoid, texting me questions about who I was talking to, whether I'd shown anyone private family matters. She accused me of turning people against her, though I'd barely spoken to anyone. Her control was slipping, and she could feel it. She started posting vague quotes on social media about healing and moving forward. "Sometimes you have to protect yourself from people who claim to love you," one post read. The comments were sympathetic at first. But I noticed some people asking questions, pushing back gently. The narrative she'd built so carefully was showing cracks. One of her posts talked about recorded proof of abuse. A friend commented, "Why are you recording your spouse? That seems unhealthy." Tessa deleted the comment. Then another person asked the same thing. She deleted that too. By the end of the week, she'd stopped posting altogether. The sympathy she'd cultivated was turning into suspicion. People were starting to wonder what she was hiding. I spent 3 days writing. Not in my notebook this time, but in a long-form essay. I titled it, "When Communication Becomes Control," and published it anonymously on a blog platform. I didn't name Tessa. I didn't share recordings. I just told the story of someone who'd weaponized trust, who'd turned everyday conversations into evidence, who'd built a false narrative through editing and manipulation. I talked about what it felt like to be erased, to watch your own words twisted against you, to lose your reputation because someone you loved chose cruelty over truth. The essay went viral. Within days, it had thousands of shares, hundreds of comments from people who'd experienced similar manipulation. Therapists shared it. Lawyers shared it. Domestic abuse advocates shared it. And in our small community, people started recognizing the story. Nobody said anything directly, but I could feel the shift. The essay had planted a seed of doubt in the narrative Tessa had worked so hard to create. Truth, it turned out, had a way of finding light. Someone in our social circle forwarded the essay to Tessa. I know because within hours, she posted a long, angry response on social media. She didn't name me, but everyone knew. "Some people use their pain to manipulate others," she wrote. "They twist stories for sympathy and clout. They erase accountability and play victim. I have receipts. I have proof. And I won't be silenced by someone who can't face the truth." The post was a mistake. People in the comments started dissecting her language, pointing out manipulation tactics, questioning why she was so defensive about an anonymous essay. One person wrote, "If it's not about you, why are you responding?" Another wrote, "Using the phrase, 'I have receipts' is really concerning in the context of a marriage." The more Tessa defended herself, the worse it looked. By the end of the day, she'd deleted the post. But screenshots had already spread. Her credibility, built so carefully on edited audio and false tears, was crumbling faster than she could control. Tessa's employer, a non-profit focused on family services, started receiving questions about her public behavior. Someone had sent them screenshots of her social media meltdown alongside the anonymous essay, drawing clear parallels. Within a week, they asked her to take a leave of absence while they reviewed internal conduct policies. She called me for the first time in weeks, her voice shaking with rage. "You did this. You're destroying my life." I stayed calm. I wrote an anonymous essay about manipulation. If you saw yourself in it, that's not my fault. She hung up. Her family stopped answering her calls as frequently. The parents who'd sat in judgment of me at that intervention were now questioning their daughter's version of events. Mia called me one evening, her voice quiet. I'm sorry I believed her so quickly. I should have asked more questions. I thanked her and hung up. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not because Tessa was suffering, but because truth was finally stronger than fiction. Leo finished the comprehensive forensic breakdown of every recording Tessa had ever sent me. The report was 40 pages long, complete with visual evidence, timestamps, and technical analysis. My lawyer sent it quietly to Tessa's attorney along with a letter outlining potential legal consequences for fabricating evidence. Within 2 days, Tessa's lawyer called my lawyer requesting a meeting. During that meeting, held in a conference room downtown, Tessa's attorney admitted they couldn't defend the recordings as authentic evidence. The fabrication was too obvious, too well documented. They withdrew the complaint she'd filed with my employer. HR contacted me the following day, apologizing for the leave and asking when I could return to work. The church sent a similar message. Slowly, piece by piece, the structure Tessa had built collapsed under the weight of truth. I didn't celebrate. I just felt tired. Tired of fighting, tired of defending, tired of proving my innocence against lies that should never have been believed in the first place. But I was also relieved. Finally, after months of suffocation, I could breathe. Tessa showed up at my motel room on a Thursday evening. I opened the door to find her standing there, eyes red and swollen, hair uncombed. You ruined me, she whispered. My job, my family, my friends. They all think I'm some kind of monster. I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my voice gentle. No, Tessa. You ruined trust. You took something sacred, communication between two people who loved each other, and you weaponized it. You edited reality and called it proof. You isolated me and called it accountability. I didn't ruin you. I just told the truth. She stared at me for a long moment, tears spilling down her cheeks. I thought I was protecting myself. I nodded slowly. From what? She didn't answer. She just turned and walked back to her car, her shoulders shaking. I watched her drive away, feeling something complicated. Not quite forgiveness. Not quite a pity. Maybe just sadness for what we'd both lost. For what trust looked like when it shattered. For the home we'd never rebuild. For Ava, caught in the middle of a war she never asked to fight. 6 months later, I started a small podcast from my apartment. I called it Honest Frequency, and focused on rebuilding trust and healthy communication after manipulation. I interviewed therapists, lawyers, survivors of emotional abuse. I shared strategies for documenting truth when someone was gaslighting you. The response was overwhelming. Listeners wrote to thank me, to share their own stories, to say they felt less alone. Ava came to visit every weekend. Slowly, carefully, she started asking questions about what had really happened between her mother and me. I answered honestly but gently, never making Tessa the villain, just explaining that sometimes people hurt each other and healing takes time. She seemed to understand more than I expected. One evening, I recorded the final episode of the podcast's first season. I looked into the camera and said, sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about clarity. It's about refusing to let someone else's lies define your truth. It's about rebuilding what was broken and helping others do the same. I paused, then smiled. The cost of that clarity might be higher than the person who wronged you. But it's worth it. Because peace, real peace, only comes when you stop fighting their version of reality and start living your own. I hit stop and exhaled. For the first time in over a year, I felt free. Not because I'd won, but because I'd survived. And that, I realized, was enough.